What's going on? All right. So yes, on top of everything else, we're dealing with human fallibility. What's going on? I'm your host, Hugo Fernandez. To hear me, I have to unmute myself. I was introducing the show here on LaGuardia Radio WLGR as our first podcast. And my first guest today for this new way of doing the show is Mahari Simmonds, JD, a LaGuardia alum and recent graduate of the CUNY School of Law, who's going to talk about an opinion piece he wrote for the New York Daily News concerning his experience as an African-American man growing up interacting with the New York City Police Department. You want to say hi, Mahari?
Hey, how's it going? And thank you for having me, Hugo.
You got it. And sorry for all the struggles with the technical stuff, but we persist. That's one thing we are persistent here at WLGR. So to kind of start out, by the way, I want to thank Karen Miller, Professor Karen Miller, Dr. Miller, social science, whose idea was that, first of all, brought your article to my attention, and also, I think, also suggested that I have you on the show. This opportunity. But why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your studies?
So I'm from Brooklyn, New York, born and raised. I'm in the Bronx now, but I still call Brooklyn home. I'd say, kind of like my journey to getting to LaGuardia. I dropped out of high school fairly early, I would say, like during my sophomore year. And I took up this program out Brooklyn Job Corps off of DeKalb Avenue in Brooklyn. Was really successful there. I had a lot of hardships prior to coming there. But my sister told me, kind of, if I wanted to stay with her, I had to go to school. And so I went there, got my GED. And one of the teachers, kind of said to me, like, you should definitely be going to college right now, right? I think I was still 17. I had finished before my actual school year. My actual grade was supposed to have finished and graduated with their diplomas. But it took me some time. I didn't really take college seriously or look at it as an actual perspective until I had my son when I was 20 years old. And I was living with a really close friend who I call a brother. And he had told me, he was in school. He was actually going to Hostos Community College up in the Bronx. And he told me, he's like, hey, you're way smarter than I am. You should be going to college too. And so, that was one of the first times I felt like someone actually, in a long time, someone believed in my ability to do well in school. So I went. And LaGuardia, thankfully, was the only school that accepted me. And I ended up there, and it was an incredibly transformative experience for me. The 2 years that I studied there.
What was your major at LaGuardia?
I went through multiple majors. I started off as an accounting major because I had the same thought as me. I was like, oh, I'm gonna be an accountant. I'm gonna make a lot of money. I was doing well. Accounting, I switched to philosophy, then to psychology. And I thought, it was with Professor Miller. I had one Dr. Carolyn Cole, who runs the honors program. And they were saying that you should consider, if you're going to be transferring to a four-year college, the amount of credits that would be transferable all through liberal arts. And so a liberal arts major, and I graduated from LaGuardia with honors.
So you were in the honors program with Dr. Coe?
Yeah, man.
Yeah, liberal arts is a great major. And in fact, I tell students, if you can't figure out what to major in, English or liberal arts are the two good ones because you're going to learn how to communicate. So, yeah. So you get out with honors. So what happens next?
Yeah, so I transferred to NYU. It was my dream school. One of the things I actually think about, it was so funny, I was someone, not so much now, but back in the day, I posted frequently on social media. And one of the things, I believe it was my first semester at LaGuardia, it was 2011. And I made a post. I said, I'd done really well in my first semester. And I said, NYU doesn't seem so far-fetched, right? Because I wanted to go there. And it just so happened one of the last schools that accepted me was NYU. And I got there through the CC Top program, Community College Transfer Opportunity Program, where they provide students in the New York area that go to community colleges. They pay half of the tuition for you to go there. And so I had gotten that and a merit scholarship in addition to that CC Top scholarship to attend NYU. So I was there as a applied psychology major, and it was a very different experience from NYU. There were a lot of things there that I wasn't exactly used to, but the professors, just like at LaGuardia, were exceptional, right? And I kind of found my way through like having those conversations, trying to figure out, keeping my head down, sticking to a path that I wanted to do, staying true to my identity and the things that I cared about, not kind of losing myself in that process of going to a predominantly white institution as like, a young Black man from a low socioeconomic environment. It can be very daunting to go into an experience where it feels like everyone sees you as the person who, like, why is he here, right? Even if they don't necessarily has that imposter syndrome where, do I actually belong here? It's really hard to get there. But yeah, I graduated from there. I look back on it fondly, just because of the people and the connections that I was able to, to get from that experience.
So it's your dreams came true in a sense.
Absolutely, it was everything that I had planned for. It came true with me getting into NYU. So.
All right. So law school. What was next? Were you thinking, the terminal degree as you finished NYU, or how'd you end up at CUNY Law?
Yes. So I always wanted to go to law school. It was one of the plans. Just to backtrack briefly, the reason why, aside from me going because my best friend and brother was telling me, hey, you should be going to college, is because I wanted to be a firefighter. And I knew I needed the credits, right? And so you needed college credits. And I was like, I took the test and I was waiting to get the results back and to be called. And so I was in school. And I wanted to make a plan for myself. I said, if I don't become a firefighter, if I don't get the call back, then what will be an alternative for me? And so there was another professor at LaGuardia, Ira Gerald, who ran, I can't remember the name of the course, but it was the equivalent of kind of preparing students to be outside of school, right, for like the workforce. And it's really escaping what the name of the course was. But anyways, he had me make out a whole plan for myself, right? Book. It was kind of a final project. And I said that if I wasn't going to be a firefighter, and I planned out the next 10 years and like all these things after that. And obviously I'm not a firefighter. And I took the LSAT. I did pretty well on the LSAT. I applied to a bunch of schools. And one of the last schools that I applied to actually was CUNY School of Law. And knowing that, the work that I've done with education and youth and wanting to focus on like juvenile justice and families, I knew that CUNY was the option for that, right? Additionally, I thought back on my experience at LaGuardia, like all the friends I made, like all the professors, you speak about Karen Miller, I still talk to her all these years later, right? We're talking about 9 years later. That's the type of relationships that, she reached out to me. It was like, you should write something. I know we're going to get into the piece a little bit, but she was an individual. She reached out to me and said, you should actually write something.
Why do you think Dr. Miller was suggested that?
Well, Dr. Miller's always been there for me, right? I've sat in her office hours for a long time. We've had it together. her partner, with Emily and his name. I'm sorry, Dr. Miller, I forgot your son's name. It's been so long. It's gonna come to Oscar. See, there it goes. I knew it was gonna come to me. Oscar, we had dinner together, and we've had some, when I was trying to figure out which undergrad to go to, kind of walk me through the financial process and like all of these things, all these considerations that should be taken into account. So obviously we have each other as friends on Facebook, and occasionally she'll reach out to tell me that she's been thinking about me. She hopes that I'm well. So it seems to make sense. She's always been talking about, kind of putting me in a position to be sitting and telling me that I have the ability to write and I should write. And I didn't take her up on that offer until just recently. So it was just a perfect fit.
But did she know anything about your background with experiences with the NYPD and things like that she was at for this particular piece, or it was just in general kind of getting you?
Yeah, I don't think she knew anything about this particular piece. I posted something on Facebook prior, so she had some knowledge of it. But there were other things that we had spoken about, in relation to LaGuardia, but not specifically like that encounter with the police.
Okay. Well, you want to talk a little bit about CUNY Law?
Yeah. It was, man. One of the things I tell the youth that I work with, I was like, be sure, right? Because, right. I laugh. It's funny because, before I was going to law school and before I was even applying, anyone that I spoke to as a lawyer said to me, "Are you sure you want to go to law school? Are you sure you want to be a lawyer?" I don't think they were saying it maliciously, right? They were just, I think it was coming from like a place of good faith, saying like, do you need to know what you're getting yourself into, like when you're experiencing this? And so one of the things I would say, or one of the things that I tried to do or was conscious of before going to CUNY was staying true to myself, right? And trying to achieve a sort of balance in learning the law and the inherentness, unfairness of it versus what I wanted to do to be able to change the law, right? And making good connections and making friends and being able to rely more on those friendships and those connections and then actually that's part of enjoying the experience of being inside of law school, right? CUNY is a very small school, 450 students and throughout all three classes. So everyone knows each other, right? You know each other's names. Like I know everyone's name in my grade that I graduated with, right? I've had conversations with them and learned a lot from and about so many of them. And I think that's what I took, in addition to like learning the law, which I do, being able to learn about people's lives and like why they want to, like the work they want to do in the social justice field and why to get in there, I think was extremely important for me. My experience at CUNY, something that was extremely memorable. I have some really lifelong friendships and kind of some family ships, as I would call it, from being there. So I'm 100% appreciative of that experience.
Spend some time over there because we're right over the bridge. So,
yeah.
And I don't know how I got on the. I think I ran into the president of the college. I want to say Mary Blick.
Dean Billick.
Billick, right?
Yeah.
It is Dean Billick. And we met at some sort of board of trustees thing at CUNY Central. And I had approached her for some of my ideas and so I got onto the emails. And one of the things I've taken advantage is the Sorensen Center and Camille, who exactly,
she's amazing.
Yeah, she's amazing. And the Sorensen Center guests and the talks they've had there are amazing. We have been in talks I want to stream some of those, do their own streaming, but I wanted to stream something here for us. But it's a really great and I'm always, so I continue to get emails from them about all the different activities that they engaged in. Is there any particular, kind of hands-on activity that you got involved with while you were at the law school that was a memorable activity, a direct action where you're working with the community and things like that? Because I know that's always part of the program. You have a lot of those opportunities.
So when you say community, are you talking about the New York community at large? Or are you talking about the CUNY community?
Anybody, anything you did at the law school that was where there was kind of was
Sorry, asking
experience.
for specifics. Yeah.
Yeah, but no, it's good. No, it's a good. Yeah, I mean, good clarification. No, I'm just interested in what kind, because I know that for example, CUNY Law got mixed up with fighting the Trump administration about when people from coming in for 5 different countries early on in the Trump administration. I mean, they were at the airports working with people, trying to get them, into the country, getting their visas. So I don't know if there was any of those kinds of activities that you had any experience with while you were there.
Yeah. So there were a few things that I would say I was a part of. I'll try not to. I'll give cliff notes instead of like the whole experience. One of the things that I was a part of BALSA, which is Black Law Students Student Association. I'm getting it wrong now. Black Law Students Association. Let me say it correctly. And I was vice president there. And so things that we had the opportunity to do was connect with the Black students and students at large at CUNY Law. And one of our main focus was to, people who want to work in social justice or doing internships, right? But these summer internships are extremely necessary to get experience for when you go on to apply for jobs, right? And so one of the things that we were focused on was raising funds to ensure that at least some of our colleagues who are participants in BALSA happen through the summer, right? Because one of the things that CUNY prides itself on is servicing students from historically marginalized communities, and a lot of these communities are, dominantly underserviced. And so that was something that we definitely want to focus on and that we were successful in. Another thing that I wanted to focus on, I like direct service, right? And so like I've always wanted to work with youth. That's what I cared about the most. And so one of the things that I did was, years that I was at CUNY, was participate in it's a debate program where you have high school kids from all over the city. I had 3 students, and it ended up being 2 students for 3 years. I won't say their names just because maybe they don't want their names to be said, but I had 2 Black teenage girls.
Yes.
Sorry? Yeah.
FERPA, the federal legislation that says that it's student information with outsiders. Yeah.
So I just, I worked with 2 Black teenage girls. They were amazing, right? And so I worked with them on 3 debates. Well, this year was only 2 debates, their final year. And I would meet with patients and I learn about them and they'll learn about me. And, one of the greatest things, debates, right? Which is, I felt really, because I don't think I had anything to do with it. Maybe I had a little bit to do with it, but that was kind of my way of sort of giving back or just being active, right? It's something that's still related to law. It's still, but just working with youth. So that was amazing for me. Another thing as well, and this is in connection to Sorensen, which you mentioned.
Right.
And I agree with you. Sorensen puts on a ton of sponsors, a ton of good events at the school that I think a lot of people should be to and participate in. But one of the things before it got changed because of, I believe it was the executive order by President Trump, was we were able to go to Cuba under a learning program, right? And so we would learn about she was the Cuban legal system, and we were there for just under a week. And that experience was internationally, and that
Wow.
was just amazing for me. It was I have so many fond memories of just being able to when I was by myself, just having conversations with locals who I don't speak Spanish, so I'm fortunate that they're better at acquiring language than I am, and were able to speak to me, going out and experiencing the food and just learning about the culture and about the legal system. I think it was extremely important. So there's that. I don't want to say that was a community thing, but it was definitely an important experience for me while being at CUNY.
Yeah, I'm Cuban, so I find that interesting that you had that opportunity. There's a lot to learn when you go to it, and for that to be your first international travel experience is,
for me at least.
well, I mean, I'm sure there's going to be some places you get to go, but that was one hell of a one to go. Not, I mean, Cuba's history with race, which it continues to struggle with that issue, but I think that at least tried to face it, where I think previous regimes kind of dismissed it, let's say. Get off track. We're coming close to the half-hour mark, so I'll just out of the way and say that you're watching What's Going On. I'm your host, Hugo Fernandez, here on LaGuardia Radio, WLGR, and my guest today is Mahari Simmonds, JD. He's a LaGuardia alum and a recent graduate of the CUNY School of Law. And he's talking about, we're about to get an opinion piece that he wrote for the New York Daily News concerning his experience as an African-American man growing up interacting with New York City Police Department. And so again, cover a little ground that I talked about at the beginning of the show. Dr. Miller shared this with the campus community. Obviously, the pandemic is the major issue of the day, right? But you could almost argue that the Black Lives is running a close second, or in some sense intertwined, because I was watching the news today and talked the fact that your chances of COVID are 2 to 3 times higher as an African American or as a Hispanic American. So these are two tied together for today's show in a sense, but we're going to focus on growing up as an African American man in New York City in the NYPD. So you want to talk a little bit about what drove you to write this piece, or I mean, should I even ask? I'm sure that I don't have to talk about the narration, but the fact of putting pen to paper, as they say, sending this thing into the New York Daily News. What was that about? What was that?
Yeah, so obviously we've if anyone hasn't been under a rock for at least the last few months, 2-3 months, we've been seeing what's been going on inside the news in terms of Black lives and encounters with the police going and for some what might say like what's expected, a high likelihood of encounters with police, or way higher. One of the things that was very frustrating to me, I try is understanding of others' opinions and kind of thoughts on subjects. And I understand that we don't all monolithic people, especially Black people, right? And so like disagreements, I'm here for. But one of the things I started seeing is that when we start talking, in particular George Floyd, right? There have been other instances. I think seeing that video, the amount of rage that I felt from it was one thing, because I was extremely enraged for days, and I still am. But as I I started seeing the responses, the protests started after. And I started seeing people on my timeline and the conversations on the news and conversations, like just on different social media platforms. The conversation started moving from one of the protests and what the reason for protests is to speak about police brutality against Black people, right? And just generally to speak about the plight of Black people 400 plus years, 450 plus years, right? The conversation started shifting to why are people rioting? Why are people looting, right? And it felt like that started to become the prevailing common narrative. Like, we've moved from why people are doing something to we don't agree with why it's actually like the method in which they're doing it, right? And it became very frustrating to me because I said, we're losing a chance to have a real conversation and to open ourselves up to be vulnerable, right? Because I think Black people are open daily to be vulnerable to like what we're seeing, to being killed, right? And the way that we express our pain and the way that we speak about it, in which that we show, has been received with, oh, you shouldn't loot, oh, you shouldn't riot, oh, we don't really appreciate the fact that this, and there's been memes like kind of going around saying like, oh, when we're quiet, you don't like it. When you kneel, you don't like it. When we riot, you don't like it. When we loot, like the only thing you want from us is silence and just moving on. And I feel for a lot of people, like we're tired of that. And so the reason why I wrote this piece is to move the narrative back, right? I think that one of the things, when I saw that video of George Floyd and the conversation like going on, like those two specifically, one of the things was that if something like that were to happen to me, I don't want to just be a hashtag and have someone, right? I want to be able to tell my own story and just start writing again, right? Because if something were to ever happen to me, I want my story to be in my own words. People know what I was thinking, how I was feeling, and I can be the judge of my life in a sense, right? And so I decided to write about this, kind of like a share Black stories, because I think it's important. Another thing I want to add to this as well, I know I'm kind of going like in circles, but another thing I want to add to is that the conversation about George Floyd not being, the model citizen start to dominate the conversation as well, right? Oh, we're uplifting an individual is a criminal, as though that instance, that situation, that encounter with the police, whether it was his fault, what happened to him should not have happened, right? You start to miss those for change. And so I said to myself, I want to be able to write something to show that you can do nothing. Even though we have Breonna Taylor as an example, you can be doing absolutely nothing, minding your business, and still be susceptible to police violence, to state violence. And they were the impetus for me deciding, and Dr. Miller, who gave me the extra boost and push that I needed to get up and write this. I would say like those for me writing this opinion piece.
So what has been the response? I mean, obviously this show is a response to it, but what has been the response that you have gotten as a result of writing this piece, and what's that been?
Yeah, I think for those who were close to me that it was just more, kind of speaking about it a little bit more, kind of rehashing like things that went on, talking about how it can, like these types of conversations to sort of, I think humanize Black people, right? Because it can be frustrating for me. It feels like the conversations, the way media, at least the way I view things or the way I perceive it, is that the conversations about Black people can be extremely dehumanizing, and it's a way for me to kind of humanize other Black people, right? At least my poor attempt at it. I think for those that didn't know, it was a way for them if I wanted them to share, right? Not for me. Like I had no necessarily any type of notoriety from this. I felt like it was a way, it was a kind of with me, right? To kind of get that out for myself because in my way as my way of saying something, right? To going against the norm because, you know, people might feel a way about going out and protesting with COVID going on. You know, you had mentioned it earlier because they want to be safe, right? They want to protect their health and, you know, they have very real fears about getting sick and engaging in these protests. And I think one of the ways for me to engage in the protest was writing this piece. So that was something I was thinking about as well. Those that didn't know, they looked at it as like a moment for, you know, to have a conversation, not necessarily with me. They want to thank me for writing it, but also having a conversation with those who think that like these things just only, like the cops only have these encounters when they're bad people, right? And the times where it doesn't happen, it's just a rogue cop doing a rogue, not a history of violence against Black people that starts with slave patrols, right? Amongst the bold slavery, you have slave patrols, not too long following that, right? And really drawing that line or drawing that connection rather to how the police state as Black people see is just another iteration of what violence looks like against Black people since we've been in this country. So I think it was just important for others to really have the conversation with their family and friends and associates that might feel differently, and to be able to share an experience of a guy who I don't look at myself as like a model citizen, but they look at like people might look at me as like, yo, you know, you're an individual, like you have a law degree, you're somebody who shouldn't be involved with the police, or, you know, but I was 15, right? I was doing what a 15-year-old should be doing, or what one a 15-year-old would necessarily not be looking at as this is not wrong. Like what 15 fight going on, the vast majority like, all right, I want to go see that fight, right? And it showed that there are a range of situations, many of which don't hit the news, right? Because the only ones that hit the news, the ones that get national attention, I feel as though individuals think that that's the only times that those things happen. Many of other instances where something happens where you just get to go home, right? Or you're arrested and no one knows about it because like it doesn't just get the attention that, you know, George Floyd or Breonna Taylor or the countless other individuals that we can speak about over the course of, you know, since the start of Black Lives Matter movement, or even before that, right? There's so many other instances of it that we just don't know about because it just hasn't gotten national attention. So writing was a way to kind of get that out, to have that conversation.
And there's a certain degree of escalation that happens as well. I mean, we talk about the criminalization of youth. You know, the way that an African-American youth is treated as opposed to a white youth, a European youth, is very different, and that kind of the process of escalating them, and then, you know, before it's all said and done, somebody ends up in the mass incarceration. I realized while you were talking that, you know, maybe some folks didn't read the article, but so they would 15 years old. You heard about a fight. You went to go see it with your friends. Somebody, you know, in your way, and you pushed them. Turned out it was a police officer. They brutalized you and took you to the station, not knowing you were 15. At which point you were handcuffed to a chair and left there until your mother came to get you. And of course, the first question your mother asked, which is every mother asks, is, "What did you do?" Right? That kind of thing. Why did you end up in the hands? I think at that moment, and I don't know, it happened to me too, for different reasons. You know, I was older, so I actually, you know, and which is different too, because I think about you being an attorney now, and hopefully this is not something that would haunt you, and you got a paperwork that would haunt you as an attorney as well. But that you find yourself in the system, at the mercy of the system, and it's very different. There are those people who think of police and prison is they're protecting us from whoever, right? The bad guys, whatever they want to, well, how are they kind of come up with this image of who it is that ends up in those systems? To be in those systems is a very different experience. And I'm wondering, did any of that have to lead to you wanting to become an attorney? Black youth would find themselves at the mercy of police officers who are not behaving appropriately?
I think that was definitely a driving force originally. One of the things that I spent some time as a youth inside of I don't know what it was called. It was a transition right before, like, youth who weren't supposed to go to Spofford when Spofford was open. I think Spofford closed in 2009. The juvenile detention center. There were individuals who would go to I don't know, like a halfway house where you can go AWOL, meaning you could leave the facility, but if you left the facility or the house that they have you in, then they would put you in Spofford, right? And these are unrelated incidents. I just want to be clear. But there was a time when I was there, and I remember that experience very vividly, not just being inside that halfway home, but also the days we would go to Spofford during the day, sit there. We weren't learning anything. There were no scheduled classes. I was there for quite some time. And I don't remember having one learning session the whole time that I was there, right? It was kind of a culture where, and like I said, I know it's closed down now, but it was a club where they promoted, like, oh, if you want to fight, you can go ahead and fight, and then we'll take care of you after, right? There was no real, it didn't seem like anyone really cared what happened to us. And from my recollection, I don't remember seeing any youth there that wasn't Black or brown, right? And I wanted to end, when I was at law school, I kind of reflected on that experience, and I remember being I was in Philly doing an internship at the juvenile. There was an individual there. They weren't in a courtroom, but they were in. It wasn't actually. They weren't in front of a judge. I can't remember what the terminology is used in Philadelphia, but it was an individual who kind of acted as a judge. Wrong, then they would go to a judge. So not necessarily a diversion, but just kind of a middleman between both the person getting to a judge if need be. Anyways, I was listening to this gentleman's experience, and he had been in the criminal justice system since he was 11 years old, since as early as he could remember, as young as he could remember. And I remember the pain that I felt, right? Because his experience made me feel, I remember the first time I had encountered the police, and all the time since then that I had encountered the police, and I was heartbroken. Very shaken from that, and I realized I don't want to do that kind of work, right? Because originally I wanted to work with youth offenders, work towards closing down juvenile that youth are put in, because I don't think it's supposed to be. Youth are redeemable. They're supposed to be looked at as redeemable, right? Our criminal justice system is supposed to be looked at as redeemable, but really it's not, right? But youth especially are supposed to be looked at as redeemable, but they're not cultivating an environment where youth have the resources to be successful. You're just putting them in baby prisons, waiting for them to reoffend so you can put them in adult prisons. And I want to end that cycle, right? End that cycle completely. But I found myself so harmed from my mental health. I found myself so harmed by it that I realized I couldn't do this work and be whole, right? I would be giving up a great deal of myself, that because it's too close to home, essentially, where the burn extremely fast, the emotional investment would be too taxing. And so I chose another field, still along the lines of working with youth but with families now, where I'm with parents to help them regain custody of their children, helping them get into programs in order, to create autonomy in their lives, right? And that's the type of work where I feel like it's something that I'm still passionate and something I still care about very much, but it's not so close to home where I'll lose a sense of myself in doing the work, where to the point where I don't or can't physically do the work anymore because of the emotional strain.
We're in the last quarter hour, and when we were live, this would be a time for questions, but it's also a time to talk about the future. And so you've kind of begun that conversation. Is this with a particular organization, or are you working with for example, a non-for-profit kind of work, or how does it?
Yeah. So I'm working with Brooklyn Defender Services. And obviously they're located in Brooklyn. They handle a wide of legal issues, from criminal justice to family law. And I'm going to be working in the family law division, advocating and help parents advocate for themselves in battles against ACS and child services. A lot of parents are losing their children due to neglect, right? When we think about child abuse cases or cases where we think, oh, they must have abused them, right? They're beating them, they're harming them in some way, but the overwhelming majority of cases are neglect cases, right? And one of the things that we see is that mandated reporters, child and have on the adequate jacket in the wintertime, and so someone with ACS or calls child services and reports the parent, right? And instead of saying, okay, why was the parent not able to get the child the jacket? Now you have someone involved in their life, and there can be a lot of detriment. Parents they're not familiar with the legal process, and so that's what we're there for. To help familiarize themselves, help advocate for them, help them advocate for themselves. And I really look forward to taking on this new experience as a trial attorney, as a litigator.
It's interesting because in a former life, you'd say, school programs that put me in contact with the day school a great deal, and counselors. And this was, one of the things that we always got into was, whether you would call a parent. And I remember one particular counselor, we would talk about the welfare of the child, by calling ACS, are things actually going to get worse for the child? Like, for example, if they find themselves in the foster care system, so really had to think it out, interventions. And like you pointed out, yes, there are cases of violence, but the overwhelming majority of those children who are harmed is by virtue of neglect, and all kinds of forms. But like you said, again, it's the kind of a thing where have to ask the question, or maybe even ask the parent, saying, why don't you have a coat for the child? And it could be something as simple as, we can't afford it, we don't have one. And there are other interventions besides calling ACS again, and getting people getting them into the system, which I think is once they're in the system, like it seems like what you're saying is, it's parents who are not prepared to defend their children need help. And do you find yourself actually litigating as well? Because I had an ex-wife. She worked for the state at one point defending the mentally ill, and she litigated every week. But she told me most attorneys rarely find themselves in court. I guess, though, in the public sector, is this something where you're going to find yourself in court on a weekly basis?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You're going to find yourself in court a lot, which I look forward to. I look forward to it, not in the sense of, I'll say I look forward to the day where this type of work is not necessary, right? Because that means that we're doing the work to address poverty, right? We're doing the work to address, these and resources that make it such that most people, people of affluent families don't have to be there. It's a whole different set of problems. So I don't want to say I'm excited. I feel like the work is necessary, but I look forward to the day where it's not necessary. to be doing this,
Right.
to be, like we're work ourselves out of business essentially.
I'm going to ask you so, or are you studying for it
No,
now?
I'm studying for the bar right now, actually.
Okay, so that's the
Yeah,
anticipation of litigation.
yeah. The anticipation. I'll tell. You know, I I like to think that when individuals, people that I spoke to, is like, do you really want to be a lawyer? The thing that they were thinking about when they asked that question was when they study for the bar. It's not. It's there's fun, and then there's the opposite of fun, and then there's the bar, and they're studying for the bar rather, and it's far, far, far away from anything that anyone would want to be doing. Like I want to that enjoy studying for the bar.
And I
Great
understand
place.
it's not unusual time you take it to not necessarily succeed at it, and having to take it again. I know that story too. Like I said, I guess I've been around a lot of lawyers, but
Yeah,
I'm sure you would. I would not be surprised if you told me you aced it the first time out, because you seem very determined. We're actually running out of time. We're near the end of the hour, and I want to leave a little time for the music. So anything you'd like to share with us, or anything you want anyone you want to thank or anything like that?
yeah. Again, I like to thank you for reaching out and helping me, with the edits, and there's another individual as well whose last name I feel is Professor Gallagher, um, who also helped with edits and writing the piece. So I definitely want to just make sure I check, and I don't like to get
Right.
because then it feels like you didn't really do. It feels like you didn't really do what you wanted. Oh, Tannenbaum. I'm sorry, Laura Tannenbaum. I
Right.
said Gallagher. I was thinking about my professor from
That was,
CUNY Law. Laura
right.
Tannenbaum, I want to thank for helping me with the edits as well. Um, that's pretty much it for right now.
It's so great you have all these relationships with faculty. I try to explain to students the importance of developing those relationships through office hours and how they have a way of paying off over time. I have a Zoom meeting once a week with a former professor, and we're prepared to be there for you, for the rest of your life if you'll have us. But I just got to say, in this show, I get an opportunity to meet exceptional folks who are doing exceptional things. But today was a very special show for me. Hearing your story, your perseverance, the things you've accomplished, and the things that you are prepared to do moving forward. And that you did it, going to LaGuardia. That you got to go to NYU, which is your dream. That you're being an attorney through CUNY Law, and which is an incredible engine for change in the country. And I just want to thank you for being on my show. I want to thank Dr. Miller for suggesting that you be on our show and sharing your story. And thank you very much, Mahari.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me.
Yeah. So if you've been watching, it's LaGuardia Web Radio, WLGR. What's going on? I'm your host, Hugo Fernandez, and my guest today has been Mahari Simmonds, JD, a LaGuardia alum and a recent graduate of the CUNY School of Law, who is currently studying for the bar. So let's keep him in our prayers, our well wishes. And he talked about an opinion piece he wrote for the New York Daily News concerning his experience as an African American man growing up interacting with the New York City Police Department. This is an issue that is not going away, same way COVID isn't going away. And we need to keep talking to each other and understanding the depth of it and what it's going to take to put it behind us. But I just want to thank everybody for watching and listening. Take us out, Dr. Riccio, who's my engineer today. Thanks.